31 trillion. And no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the Millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer on the other side of the camera. Welcome, everyone, to this podcast. And we have called it, and are calling it, 31 trillion. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, 31 trillion. So in the Daily Caller, the national debt today tops $31 trillion for the first time in American history. The Treasury Department data released yesterday, which was Tuesday, showed that the total national debt was $31.123 trillion as of this week. The new milestone was reached even as the federal government's insatiable spending has slowed considerably as the COVID-19 pandemic has waned. Yeah, it's slowed down? I don't think so. In the months following the outbreak, the national debt rose by $1 trillion in just 1 month's time. Not just once, but twice in 2020. So twice in 2020, it took only 1 month for the national debt to increase by $1 trillion. So $2 trillion in 2020 alone. The debt went up as a result of the pandemic and the reaction to the pandemic, which I think most people would agree was incredibly inefficient and stupid. As a result, the federal government spent $3.1 trillion more than it received in 2020, and it spent $2.8 trillion more than it received the following year in the Biden years, which has only been, year and a half or so that he's been in office. But Biden has spent $2.8 trillion because he doesn't want to be outspent by Trump, who spent $3.1 trillion almost exclusively, of course, on the pandemic and the pandemic response. So why does this matter? It matters, ladies and gentlemen, because we are entering a period of time, and in as much as you may have heard this said before, like 15 years ago or 10 years ago, the difference is that turning this debt around, being able to pay it back, is almost an impossibility without some sort of draconian measure. What are some of those draconian measures? Well, one would be to majorly overhaul Social Security so that instead of being able to retire in your early 60s, mid 60s, for example, you would then have to retire at the earliest at, let's say, 68, 69, 70 years old. That could be one of the major adjustments. Another adjustment that is obvious is to simply stop spending money, like have government pulled back to accomplish only that which it was supposed to accomplish. And the next one is to devalue the currency. And if you devalue the currency, that clearly means that you are significantly poorer because it has the same practical effect as massive inflation. You are significantly poorer than you were the day before because inflation is eating away at the value of your savings. Devaluing the currency does the exact same thing. And so the conservative movement really has messaged for as long as I can remember about the need for limited government, if not for any other reason than to limit government's spending, but also the constant expansion of government. Now, we are in a situation where those days actually are very likely to end. And they're very likely to end because I don't see where else you can get money from. I don't see how you can continue to print money knowing that inflation is currently out of control. We have a problem. And I think that what we're going to see is a complete return to the 1970s all over again because of the simple fact that we have a need to slow down the economy, and that would be to increase interest rates, and then to slow inflation, which would be to increase interest rates even more. The Biden administration, of course, is using every excuse you can possibly imagine. Inflation is a result of the pandemic, and there's not enough stuff being made because people aren't coming back to work. Well, if they're not coming back to work, then why are you paying them to stay home? Here's one way to cut government spending. How about if you stop paying people who are able-bodied and sitting on the couch? How about if you stop rewarding them for not working? If the issue is that we have inflation, Joe Biden, because of the fact that people aren't making enough stuff because of the pandemic, so not enough people have come back to work yet because they're afraid to come back to work or they're comfortable staying home because they're being paid to stay home, then stop paying them to stay home. If that were really the issue, and it may in part, let's face it, be the issue. But then you have a whole nother economic area of thought where the economists are saying, well, if you have all those people come back to work, you stop paying them. Yes, the government saves money on the one hand. On the other hand, that in and of itself could be inflationary because now they're earning more by working, in theory. And that inflates the economy even more because there's more cash in the economy. So the Fed has a problem. Our entire government has a problem, and the American people have a problem. And this happened before. It was a combination last time of an oil shock, not enough energy in the U.S. in the 1970s, combined with the overspending of a war, the Vietnam War, which most people agree in modern America didn't make a whole lot of sense. But here we are. Fast forward 2022, and we're spending a lot of money in a war, the Ukraine, and before that, Afghanistan. And at the same time, we're having a problem with energy, just like we did in the 1970s. Kind of fascinating. So the United States has really backed itself into the corner with respect to its own economy, and it's all because of policymakers' decisions, and it could have been avoided. It could have been avoided. Just like I believe the pandemic could have been avoided, which is, of course, a subject for another day. So also in the Daily Caller, and linked to the fact that we have rampant inflation and $31 trillion in debt, China is having a difficult time stopping the plunging value of its currency. So China's central bank has ordered the country's state banks to stock up on dollars. And they've done this and asked their central bank to do so in the offshore branches of the China Central Bank and other Chinese banks in preparation for a major defense of the renminbi, which is, of course, the Chinese made-up currency that is pegged to the dollar. So in theory, if you have a renminbi, you can actually trade it in 1-for-1 for a dollar. Well, guess what? That's being devalued. It's going down in value because China's currency is falling relative to the dollar. And so why does this matter? It matters, of course, because the good news for the U.S. is people still see the U.S. as the safe haven. They see it's a safe haven for investment. It's a safe haven for savings. The bad news is that if you have China losing the value of its currency, it makes the leadership in China ever more ambitious to engage in potentially foreign kind of skirmishes, like with Taiwan. And we've talked about this before, and so have so many others, but this is real now. We have a world in great crisis. Also, there's a new article out that just came out today. Global Trade Group slashes expectations as the director warns of a crisis. As the world continues to struggle with the consequences of high inflation, energy crises, war in Europe, and historically tight monetary policy from developed economies, the World Trade Organization, the WTO, slashed its expectations for trade growth in 2023 by more than 2/3. So they're saying next year, trade will decrease by 2/3. So, 2/3, that's a lot. While Europe, the US, and China were getting hit by these factors in different ways, the end result is that all are expected to have reduced demand for imports. Obviously, if things cost more, you're going to have less demand for them. The International Trade Regulator reported in a press release, this hit to the demand from major developed markets is expected to squeeze growth in trade volume from an April estimate of 3.4% down to 1%. The global economy faces a multi-pronged crisis, said WTO Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, according to the Wall Street Journal. The picture for 2023 has darkened considerably. So this is concerning. And Mohammed El-Erian, a famous economist and also well-respected, by the way, in the U.S., he tweets out, this just released WTO report confirms what many other data readings have been suggesting. The global economy is slowing at a faster rate than many expected. WTO's downward revision for projected 2023 trade growth is particularly notable. 1% increase compared to the prior 3.4% increase. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're in for a pretty bumpy ride. And it's kind of like, as I said earlier, the 1970s all over again. I've got some more proof for you there. So Joe Biden, of course, grovels to OPEC. He did this yesterday. He's groveling to OPEC saying, hey, OPEC, we need more oil pumped out of the ground in Saudi Arabia and throughout the Middle East because we need to drive down gas prices at the pump. Because my people who are running for Congress need to win. So we're finding that the American people don't like high gasoline prices and high electricity prices. They don't like shortages either. Imagine that. So Biden goes to OPEC not because he's a supporter of gas and oil. He goes to OPEC because he wants to drive down the price just long enough so that the Democrats can get over the finish line and stay in control of Congress. I can't think of anything more disastrous. And so in the Daily Caller, OPEC, which includes 15 OPEC members, these are 15 countries, and the consortium's Russian-led allies, voted Wednesday to cut oil production by 2 million barrels per day. So Biden went there and asked them to increase production, and their response is, we're going to cut oil production by 2. So that's actually going to cause immediately prices at the pump to increase. Because as you know, as soon as the markets understand that the oil-producing countries of the world have band together and have chosen to decrease production, prices increase. Now, they also may be decreasing production because their data demonstrate that there's a smaller demand for gas and oil because of the economies across the globe and how they're slowing. That's certainly a good reason, but it misses the point. The United States of America, just like in the 1970s, except now it's 2022, is groveling to dictatorships in the Middle East, kingdoms, and places that treat women as second-class citizens and begging them to produce more oil because the Biden administration has done exactly what Western Europe has done, namely to try to cancel, if you will, oil and gas. And as a result, the American people are suffering, and the people in Western Europe are suffering, and we have an idiot president who literally did not learn, even though I think was Biden in office in the 1970s? Can you check that up? Yeah. I mean, obviously he was alive. We know that. But was he actually in office? I mean, you would think that this guy would have learned because, I mean, I was in the late 1970s. I was a teenager. Okay. And as a teenager, I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is really kind of scary. There are lines at the gas station. And there are people that are really irate and angry. And literally people were arguing, and in some cases, fist fighting at gas stations because they were so frustrated that they had to wait for gasoline because there simply wasn't enough. And so there's that. So was he?
1970s, he was a member of the Newcastle County Council.
So in 1970s, Joe Biden was ahead of it or on it? He was a member of the Newcastle, Delaware County Council, okay, in the 1970s. So he was an adult in the 1970s, and he experienced, without question, in real time, the United States suffering and at the mercy of the Middle East for oil and gas. And here he is, president of the United States, and he's literally repeating history because that's how stupid he is. I'm sorry, just stupid. And the Democrats too. And I know I've told this story before, but I have to again. My dad, and I was a teenager, right? And I was actually in middle school at this particular point in time. My dad had bought an Esso station. That was the precursor to Exxon. So it's ESSO, and it was a gas station. It was also a, like you could go there, get your oil changed, and they did mechanical work and all that stuff. And so one of the coolest things that I enjoyed was pumping gas. It was a lot of fun because I got paid to do it because there was no such thing as self-serve. So I got to pump gas, and at the same time, if you were the person pumping gas, you also had to wash the person's front windshield and back windshield, ask them if they wanted you to check the oil. I mean, it was truly a full service station because there was no such thing at that time as self-serve, at least not in the area that we grew up in. And I remember in just a short amount of time, we went from, a car coming in every 5 minutes and wanting gasoline to the crisis period of time in the 1970s when we had 200 cars in line. 200 cars. And because I was the youngest son in the family, my brothers did this too, to be fair, but I was asked to do this. They said, hey, Mark, here is a sign, and on the sign it says, last car. I need you to count back 150 cars because at the 151st, we think we're going to run out of gas because you were actually allocated a certain amount of gasoline in the stations. You couldn't sell all that you wanted to because there simply wasn't enough. So I had to count back, and boy, when I put that sign on the back windshield, on the back, glass windshield of the car, the 150th car, everybody else just went crazy, but they couldn't get angry at me, which is why I was asked to do it because I was young, right? I was a kid. So, but they were angry at the world, as they should be. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to be angry at the Biden administration over this because this is a guy who's old enough to remember because he was serving as an elected official in Newcastle County in Delaware. So he was an adult, and he remembers this time in American history when we were dependent upon the rest of the world. And then the lesson from the 1970s, beginning with Reagan, was never again. Never again will we be dependent upon the rest of the world for energy. We are going to make sure that we become energy independent. Energy autarky, self-sufficiency is what we want as a country. That became the policy of the United States beginning with Ronald Reagan. And that continued for a couple of decades until such time as we became energy independent. So it took a long time to get there, and it took a very short time for the Democrat Party to make us energy dependent. This is how incompetent these people are. Completely and utterly incompetent. So we're in $31 trillion of debt, and that is because of Republicans and because of Democrats, by the way, both parties. But the current crisis in energy and the high prices of electricity and the high prices of gasoline and oil and natural gas are solely belong to the Democrat Party because they do not believe in energy autarky. They do not believe in energy self-sufficiency. They want you dependent, and they have made our country dependent. Proof of that, as I said a few minutes ago, was Joe Biden going to the Middle East and groveling in front of Middle East dictators and kings and autocrats and other people who are some of the worst people in the world in terms of the way they run their countries, not free countries at all. And here we are dependent upon them once again, just like the 1970s. So yes, it is the 1970s all over again. So next up, podcast listeners, looters were illegals. So in Florida, we had Hurricane Ian, and we covered this briefly yesterday, but I have to follow up because we found out that some of the looters that were found in Florida, there were 4 looters that were engaged in post-Ian looting on a pretty wide scale, by the way. 3 of the 4 were here illegally, so not even American citizens. Imagine that. So just to get this straight, people come to the United States because they want rule of law. They want fairness. They want law and order. Then we have some of these individuals who come from those very places where there isn't rule of law and there isn't law and order. And they come to the United States and they're like, oh, let's just continue that. There's Ian. This is what we would do back in our home country. We would certainly go loot and take advantage of people's misfortune. So let's just do it here in Florida as well. So we just found out that the 4 people that were arrested were actually, 3 of the 4 were illegals. So DeSantis, this is in the New York Post, blasts the illegal alien looters after Hurricane Ian in Florida. Now, most of the heartless looters busted in hurricane-ravaged Florida were illegal immigrants. Governor DeSantis announced Tuesday as he said he'd like to drag them out by the collars and send them back to where they came from. You know what? It's perfectly okay to speak this way because these individuals don't belong here and they haven't earned the right to be here. They come here, and as I said, they actually engage in the same utter nonsense that has caused their countries to be an awful place to live. And they want to repeat that here today. And the Democrats, of course, are okay with this. The Democrats are okay with open borders and letting these people in. So now we have proof, okay? We have real-time proof that individuals who engage in this same kind of nonsense back in their home countries, which is why their home countries are awful, come here for a better life, better opportunity to rip people off. So DeSantis says, quote, we've had 4 looters that were arrested and they need to be brought to justice. The tough governor said during an update on the devastation from historic Hurricane Ian. But 3 of the 4 are illegal aliens, said DeSantis, one of the fed-up Republican governors who has been sending border crossers in Democrat sanctuary destinations. So they're basically referring to DeSantis sending people to other states. And so these are people that are foreigners. They're illegally in our country. And not only that, they tried to loot and ransack in the aftermath of a natural disaster. The incredulous sounding governor said. So folks, we're speaking about this today again, because first we found out that 3 of the 4 were illegal aliens. And won't it be interesting to see if the Biden administration deports them? Shouldn't they be deported? Yeah. Will the Biden administration deport them? Will anyone in the media follow up with Biden and with Mayorkas to find out if he's going to send them back home? These are not people we want here. We're bringing this up not just because of an absent media, but because when the media does show up, here's what they do. Here's MSNBC's Joy Reid. She's talking about DeSantis and DeSantis's comment about how individuals in Florida have a right to protect their property. And they have a right to use their Second Amendment privileges, which is really a right, let's face it, not a privilege, it's a right. The Second Amendment right to defend their property. And that's a great common sense thing to have, which is really one of the key purposes of the Second Amendment, is to protect life and property. Well, MSNBC's Joy Reid doesn't ask about the looters who are illegals. Oh, no. She attacks DeSantis. We have that clip, ladies and gentlemen, and here it is.
As Florida battles one of the most powerful hurricanes ever to hit the United States, Governor Ron DeSantis is, well, he's running for president. Not officially, not yet. But nothing like a disaster and national cameras to boost one's White House ambition. All he has to do now is open up his arms and receive federal money. Let's just be clear. That is the executive leadership. He's now got to go hand in hand to Joe Biden for aid.
Right.
So that's Joy Reid, who was really upset because DeSantis was speaking about the illegals and the looting. And we have that clip. And here is what DeSantis said. Here it is.
Not so much. The other thing that we're concerned about, particularly in those areas that were really hard hit, is, we want to make sure we're maintaining law and order. Don't even think about looting. Don't even think about taking advantage of people in this vulnerable situation. And so local law enforcement is involved in monitoring that. I told Kevin if the state needs to help as well, because you can have people bringing boats into some of these islands and trying to ransack people's homes. I can tell you in the state of Florida, you never know what may be lurking behind somebody's home, and I would not want to chance that if I were you, given that we're a Second Amendment state.
Governor,
You're coming down to St. Johns County.
So kind of common sense, right? This is how a governor should speak, because in times of disasters, right, most Americans are, let's face it, they're wonderful people and they help each other, as they should. And that is a good thing. But there are people who try to take advantage of others in natural disasters, like the individuals who looted in Florida. And their MO was all about trying to enrich themselves at the expense of everyone else. And 3 of them, as I said, were illegals. And rather than talking about this greater issue, the media just attacks and attacks. So you heard MSNBC's Joy Reid on DeSantis, and it's just incredible. It's obvious that the left is terrified of this governor in every way. And you know, the left is also losing at the polls over this whole crime issue. Yesterday, we played Senator John Kennedy's new ad, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, new ad on crime. And I just want to play this first before we go back into the attacks on DeSantis, because it's just kind of funny. I want you to understand, podcast listeners, that one of the biggest things on people's minds is the economy and inflation. And those things are all interrelated: economy, inflation, cost of electricity, cost of gasoline. The next one, of course, is crime. People are really concerned about this. And yet MSNBC and CNN and the Democrat Party is utterly silent on this. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, because naturally they can't ask the good questions. Before we do that, here's Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana with his commercial on crime. We're going to play this for you again because it's just hysterical. Here it is.
Violent crime is surging in Louisiana. Woke leaders blame the police. I blame the criminals. A mom should not have to look over her shoulder when she's pumping gas. I voted against the early release of violent criminals, and I opposed defunding the police. Look, if you hate cops just because they're cops, the next time you get in trouble, call a crackhead. I'm John Kennedy, and I approve this message.
So that is a senator who understands where people are and what they're thinking, as we discussed yesterday on the podcast. But the media is doing everything it can to undermine DeSantis, who, by the way, is also up for re-election. So you heard MSNBC's Joy Reid. Now we have CNN's Nadia Romero. We have 2 clips from Nadia Romero, who's interviewing DeSantis post-hurricane. Now, keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, the 2 counties that were affected by the hurricane the most were Lee County and Collier County. These are 2 counties that are on the southwestern part of the Florida Peninsula on the Gulf. Those 2 counties were most affected. And so Nadia Romero approaches DeSantis, and he graciously, just right off the cuff, takes the interview because he's walking in, looking at the damage and so forth. And does she ask about anything or try to really talk about things to make things better? Oh, no. It's all about the gotcha, about the response to the hurricane, among other things. Listen to this really carefully because we have 2 clips. The first one's about a minute long. And here's the clip. Listen.
Why do you stand behind Lee County's decision to not have that mandatory evacuation until the day before the storm?
Well, where was your industry stationed when the storm hit? Were you guys in Lee County? No, you were in Tampa. So that's, they were following the weather track, and they had to make decisions based on that. But, 72 hours, they weren't even in the cone. 48 hours, they were on the periphery. So you got to make the decisions the best you can. I will say, they delivered the message to people. They had shelters open. Everybody had adequate opportunity to at least get to a shelter within the county. But, a lot of the residents did not want to do that. I think probably for various reasons. Some people just don't want to leave their home, period. They're island people, whatever. But I think part of it was so much attention was paid to Tampa that I think a lot of them probably thought that they wouldn't get the worst of it. So, but they did. And I think it's easy to second guess them, but they were ready for the whole time and made that call when there was justifiable to do so.
Some of their neighboring counties, though, did have mandatory evacuations before Tuesday.
So CNN's Nadia Romero, but some of the neighboring counties had, evacuation orders in. And what CNN doesn't understand is, and what the media doesn't understand is, in the United States of America, when you own your own home, you absolutely have the right to stay in it, even if you face imminent death from a hurricane. It's just a fact. And so DeSantis, of course, is trying to bring that point home to CNN's Nadia Romero to say, look, there are people that are going to stay in their homes and shelter in place no matter what. And so, yes, we had this broad-based warning that we think the hurricane's going to hit in the Tampa area, but there's no way of knowing. And CNN, of course, they're like, oh, but, you should have known. And, of course, DeSantis is like, yeah, but the thing is, you had all of your equipment set up in Tampa because you thought that that's where it was going to hit. And it ended up hitting, of all places, in Lee County, of course. And Tampa is not in Lee County, just so you know. In Lee County, it's a significant distance away from the various places it hit, which was Pine Island, Fort Myers, and Sanibel Island, Captiva, those areas, Port Charlotte. Those areas were nailed, as was, of course, much of Naples. But the areas in Fort Myers in particular, which is Lee County, were hit the hardest. And DeSantis' point is, look, you have the right to stay in your home. Okay? We can't make you. We can suggest to you strongly that you might die and are likely to die from drowning or being pulled out to sea or having the house fall on you, crushed on you, what have you. But we can't make you. We can't make you leave. Moreover, this gotcha of, Governor DeSantis, how can you possibly not know exactly where the storm is going to hit? Because we don't know exactly where the storm is going to hit until just before it hits. Okay. Which is why you have these broad-based evacuation plans. But that wasn't enough for Nadia Romero of CNN because it's about undermining this governor so he will lose his reelection for governor in the state of Florida since he's up for election. Here's the second clip. Here it is. Listen.
Well, right. But her neighboring, if you look at Tuesday morning, they had moved the track down. Models started showing it going to Sarasota, so that's so they did that. I was in Sarasota that day with them when they were expanding some of their evacuations. Charlotte, I think, did the same thing either Monday night or Tuesday morning. But don't forget Sunday, 11 a.m. advisory, it was going to go to Taylor County in North Florida. And so, at some point you got to look to see kind of where this thing is going. So, yeah, no, I think that it's easy to say in hindsight, we had most of our supply stationed in the Tampa Bay area. As that track moved, we shifted our response further south as well. Now, we said there would be impacts for sure. And even when it was going to hit North Florida, it's such a big storm, there was going to be impacts in southwest Florida as well. But the difference between impacts and having the eye go there is much different. And for most of Sunday, Monday, and even into Tuesday, it was 150 miles away from them.
Is that one of the things you'll be reviewing once we get out of the aftermath, people get their power back on, looking at those evacuation orders? Because even Lee County, if they would have followed their own evacuation orders from what we've reviewed, they should have had that mandatory evacuation order sooner.
Well, but, the issue, though, is also that there were a lot of, they informed people, and most people did not want to do it. That's just the reality. So, you're in a situation, are you going to grab someone out of their home that doesn't want to? I don't think that's the appropriate use of government. I think that takes it a little too far.
And we heard from the FEMA administrator today as well, who says that anyone, whether you're in Florida or anywhere else, you live near water, that you should have flood insurance. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what happens with homeowners is they'll say, you're in a floodplain, you want a mortgage, you have to get flood insurance, so they do. But what they will say, if you're not in a floodplain, so people say, hey, I don't need it. The reality is, particularly in Florida, it's a pretty good idea to get it. Fortunately, usually it's pretty affordable. So I think that'll be something that people see, because you're going to have people who had total losses, who would have bought insurance if they were told they were at risk. But now you're in a situation where you're seeing floods like nobody's ever seen before, and that's just something people will, I think, internalize and then want to do something about.
There have been some criticisms about those skyrocketing premiums during your term as governor. What more could you have done, or the Florida legislature, to keep that affordable for Floridians?
Well, the flood insurance is a federal program, so that's not ours. That's a separate program. Most of the claims for this are going to be under the National Flood Insurance Program.
Yeah, so as you heard, ladies and gentlemen, I know that was a long clip, but it was worth listening to. That's CNN trying to do everything it can to nitpick decisions by this governor. Now, to be fair, that is what reporters are supposed to do to everyone, to be fair. Now, CNN, of course, would never do that same thing to a Democrat governor, ever. And we know this, of course. But in this particular case, Nadia Romero of CNN starts out with the evacuation question. Well, our models show at CNN that people should have evacuated no matter what, and much sooner. And we'll be reviewing this, Governor, after this emergency is over, reviewing your response, like you're supposed to actually know where the hurricane is going to hit, to which DeSantis responded, we actually did tell people in Lee County that using the tier zone, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, that you should, if you're in tier 1 and tier 2, you should most definitely evacuate. But once again, we can't make people evacuate. And we told them we actually don't know where the storm specifically is going to hit. So are you going to get a category 4 storm direct hit, or are you going to get a category 4 storm very much indirect hit where it's 30 miles away or 15 or 20 miles away? Big difference between the two. And then, of course, since she couldn't play gotcha effectively on that with DeSantis, Nadia Romero of CNN says, well, what about flood insurance? Everybody's complaining, Governor, about how expensive it is to have flood insurance. Yeah, that's because you live in Florida where there's water everywhere. So flooding is very, very likely. Therefore, flood insurance is very high. And to that, DeSantis says, well, you do realize that the flood insurance that is offered to the citizens of Florida is offered actually through the federal government. It's a federal program. And so its premiums are set at the federal level. They're not set by Florida. And of course, the CNN reporter, it wasn't enough. Like, she didn't even know that, of course. How could she? Because CNN hires people to do hit jobs. They don't hire people to actually provide information. Ever. And so then she continued after that, which we didn't play this part of the clip. The CNN reporter Nadia Romero says, well, but Governor, how about the wind insurance? And DeSantis is like, yeah, the wind insurance actually is provided by private insurance companies. And those private insurance companies, many of them left Florida. They left Florida for a variety of reasons. And those are very complicated reasons. And that's worth looking at. That's something that we might be able to do something about. But ladies and gentlemen, let's make something very clear to CNN and the idiots that watch it, and MSNBC and the idiots that watch it. Florida has a lot of water, and people in Florida often get flooded. Florida has hurricanes, and hurricanes are very windy, and wind and water combined causes lots of damage, which means that if you're an insurance company, the chances are your insurance rates are going to be really high. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's unfortunate, of course. It's very unfortunate. But let's face it, we have a media that is no longer interested in actually getting to the truth and or providing information. Instead, it's the gotcha questions, as you just heard from Nadia Romero, and also the MSNBC idiot. Can we play that MSNBC thing one more time? This is Joy Reid. Listen to Joy Reid. It's just incredible. We have that clip. Here it is one more time.
As Florida battles one of the most powerful hurricanes ever to hit the United States, Governor Ron DeSantis is, well, he's running for president. Not officially, not yet. But nothing like a disaster and national cameras to boost one's White House ambition. All he has to do now is open up his arms and receive federal money. Let's just be clear. That is the executive leadership. He's now got to go hand in hand to Joe Biden for aid.
Right.
So MSNBC is laughing at people in Florida who have been ravaged by Hurricane Ian. She's literally laughing at them and saying, isn't it funny? He's got to go to Biden and ask for aid. By the way, Biden's not providing the aid. The taxpayers of the rest of the country are providing the aid, not the president. The president doesn't provide aid. He doesn't just like use his magic wand. Oh, here's the aid. No, the aid is actually paid for by us. And to underscore this, the Babylon Bee has a very funny spoof in it. It's an article titled Hurricane Ravaged Florida Town Raises the Ukraine Flag so Congress will send aid. Because we're sending billions and literally tens of billions of dollars, if not more, maybe it's hundreds of billions at this point, to the Ukraine so that they can have aid to fight the Russians in a war. And MSNBC, of course, is attacking the people of Florida and the governor of Florida by saying, isn't it funny? He's got to ask Biden for aid. And so the Babylon Bee is like, yeah, well, the people in Fort Myers are raising the Ukraine flag because they figure if they do that, they'll be much more likely to get aid. Good job, Babylon Bee. Very good. So next up, podcast listeners, a great story, really interesting. And I really hope this happens to most states, that we have really a two-party system that is kind of reignited in these one-party states like Oregon and New York. So in the state of Oregon, which is obviously a deep blue state, a Republican is actually in the lead for governor in Oregon. So Oregon could have its first Republican governor since 1982, according to a new poll, as residents of the deep blue state grapple with crime, drugs, and quality of life issues, particularly in cities. Republican gubernatorial candidate and former member of the State House of Representatives, Christine Drazan, led her opponent, former Democrat Speaker of the Oregon House of Representatives, Tina Kotek, by 2 points in a recent Emerson College poll. Democrats currently dominate the Oregon legislature, and President Joe Biden won the state by 16 points in 2020, with the state's most populous city, Portland, widely viewed as one of the most left-wing places in the country. This is pretty extraordinary, okay? Even for a Republican to be like in the running, but let alone 2 points ahead, ladies and gentlemen, this shows you that there are enough thinking people in the state of Oregon that realize this is not the direction that they wanted to go in. The experiment that they had of cancel the police and the experiment they had of rampant homelessness, of course, in the cities is not working. Look, I have a quick anecdote. I have a friend who went to Oregon and he loves to backpack and go hiking. So he went hiking in the countryside, I guess in the deep woods, the mountains, whatever. I've never been to Oregon, to be honest with you. But he goes there, and keep in mind, he's in kind of the middle of nowhere hiking. And all throughout the woods where he's hiking, you have all these people that are homeless that are living there. They've built encampments like little tent cities, defecating in the streams, on the ground, trash everywhere. This is Oregon. And so obviously one of the big selling points of Oregon is that it's so pristine, so beautiful. And yet the so-called environmentalists that run the state really don't care about the environment, because if they did, they would never let that happen to begin with. So as a result of all of these crazy things, the rampant crime and the rampant homelessness and the lack of understanding of what government is supposed to do, its basic functions that clearly are not working for the citizens of Oregon, you have a Republican that's ahead. Unheard of. Remember, this is a deep, deep blue state. And so is it going to be, a Republican is going to be a super conservative, or I don't know. I'm not here to tell you how wonderful a Republic. But here's the thing. It's someone with a different point of view. Someone with a different point of view who's actually going to run the state, hopefully if she wins, and bring the state in a different direction. If for any other direction, it would be one of common sense, you know? So here are some comments to this article. I was in Portland recently, and the reports you're hearing about the homeless problem is no exaggeration. It's such a beautiful place. It's a shame that the liberals have ruined it. But let me be more clear. The liberals of the 60s and 70s who came into that area were the live and let live variety, not the woke mutants we now have that are taking things to the extreme. Interesting. Here's another one. Even if elected, there's not much she could accomplish without like-minded legislature. Another. Well, in the legislature, if the legislature is compromised of mostly Democrats, good luck in getting anything passed or even vetoed. Back in the day, Oregon used to be known for its car registration fee of only $5. It was only $5 to register your car and then to renew it. Oregon had a small, efficient government. This was in the 70s. Ask any old-timer about that. Then they elected a Democrat in 1982 and have been run by Democrats for 40 years. What does it cost to register a car now? So, ladies and gentlemen, this is all kind of common sense stuff, and I'm hoping that Republicans, when they're running for these kinds of seats, are talking about the truly basic issues of why government is supposed to shrink back to its primary focus, its primary responsibility, and in so doing, we will not only hopefully lob off the $31 trillion debt, but at the same time, bring America back to where it's supposed to be, which is small government, efficient government, and a government that it's actually working for the people, especially when it comes to taking care of homelessness and at the same time, taking care of crime on the streets. And that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Getter, True Social, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.